Good morning, everyone. This recording will be posted later on through LinkedIn, and it's just an exercise for me to just keep myself active and to discuss different agile methodologies. I just included 3 because I don't want to make it too long. And I've titled it Scrum is not the only one, because most of the job openings for the IT industry are looking for people that work with Scrum. However, within Scrum, we can find very similar methodologies such as Kanban, Lean, Safe, Crystal, and others that are within the Agile Manifesto. So the idea is to just bring up 2, at least, within that Agile Manifesto and talk about them. So about the speaker, my name is Luis Regalini. I'm a senior business analyst. I have over 10 years of experience working in business analysis and service companies. I'm experienced in multiple roles such as project manager, consultant, producer, analyst. I'm not sure if I have to call myself an agile evangelist, but I believe that's the case where someone pushes agile out towards organizations and individuals. So maybe that applies to me. I don't know. I have experience in mobile and web development, and my passion is for video games, traveling, analyzing, and talking, which I do a lot, and that's why I put together this small presentation. So within the agenda, we'll have a very short overview of the Agile Manifesto, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about Scrum, extreme programming, and Kanban. Those are the top 3. There are a lot more, as I mentioned, but I don't want to bother or bore anyone. And the last point came out a couple minutes after I finished this presentation, which is what's next. Because I thought that talking about methodologies without actually any meat in the bone wouldn't make much sense. So I put together 2 more to discuss the backlogs and its inhabitants and the ceremonies that happen within the Agile framework. So the Agile Manifesto contains this 6 items that we're gonna read in order to understand what it is and what the methodologies that are related to Agile contain and mean. So the first item is that the customer satisfaction is the priority, and it should be demonstrated through continuous deliveries and added value. This is top because most items that need to be delivered are encompassed within a 2-week or 3-week sprint. We're going to see sprints not long after this. And the idea is that the requirements need to be splitted and atomized as much as possible for us to deliver even a partial part of the feature, so that every sprint contains a little bit of value. The idea is not to have eternal sprints with features that carry over and over into following cycles, but to actually deliver something as soon as possible, even incomplete, even if something needs to be polished later on, even if CSS is not applied, colors do not match. As long as the functionality is there, that's added value. The second one, changes to the requirements should be accepted, even if at a late stage of the development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage, as it's stated in the manifesto. So this is about not being closed-minded. Even though the sprint has an objective, we should receive feedback at every moment of the process, which means we could potentially modify something that is within a sprint. There should be flexibility for that, and for that, we should plan with kind of a mattress. That's how we say it in Spanish. it should be unplanned work. So a percentage of the time that was utilized to plan that specific sprint needs to be thought about in advance to contain changes and modifications. That's what unplanned work means. Something that was not planned to begin with, but needs to be done within that sprint. If not, the change will be added to the backlog and then later on refined and prioritized. So the idea is to capture all feedback and produce within the same delivery. The customer and the development team should work together on a daily basis. This is very, very important. There are ceremonies that contain the entire team. There are others that contain leaders, but the point is that anything and everything that is decided ends up being in a common table, so everyone is aware of what we're doing. Number 4, it is necessary to provide a good environment and good support to development teams. Only in this way it is possible to keep them motivated. A lot of companies within the past 10 years started to add ping pong tables and mini football. Others even added beer. Those are amazing items for the environment. Right now, because of the pandemic, we're not able to get together under the same roof in an office. And others started to just be detractors about this type of modifications in the environment because they said that they do not justify the fact that salaries are low. I'm more of a why not everything? I prefer to have everything, good salaries and also mini football. Why not? I mean, it helps for a good environment, so why not? But this also means that some ceremonies need to be focused on team building and team health. So, for example, we're going to talk about in the future about retrospective meetings where everyone has their say. They can be anonymous or they can be straight up telling everyone what they think. But those times where the team come together and actually talk about what's wrong need to happen. Number 5, agile processes promote sustainable development because of their constant rhythm and technical excellence, which improves productivity. That's right. Those processes are part of a future presentation, and we're going to talk about it later. And last but not least, it seems like it's, part of the number 4. Retrospective moments inside a team are essential, allowing it to make the necessary adjustments and promote efficiency. As I mentioned, there needs to be at least one ceremony where everyone is involved and they can talk about what happened, what went wrong, what was good, and what needs to continue happening or what needs to start happening. Those are the retrospective moments. So the next item is going to be Scrum. This is the Agile Scrum framework, very standard. On top left, you have 4 roles. You got the product owner, the Scrum Master, the stakeholders, and the Scrum team members. Funny enough, there is no business analyst here. It's part of the Scrum team members, but usually the BA is someone that can hold multiple hats. So it's part of the team, usually interacts or acts as a product owner himself or herself. As it happened to me, I had to be a Scrum Master myself. And the BA will not be the stakeholder. Not necessarily. It could happen. It's very weird because a stakeholder is on the business side. It's someone that actually receives the solution and then sells to the executives and for specific publics. But this is not something that the business analyst should ever do. It could happen though. Yeah, it could happen. Especially in pre-made software, that could happen. So we start the cycle of cycles, as you can see, with a project vision. Before the kickoff, the team is engaged and pre-sales should give the team something to work on to understand what the epics will be. this will be part of a follow-up session. Epics come up as big pieces of the puzzle that are then split down into user stories. Those user stories are put into the first planning session, which will beget sprint planning meetings. Those planning sessions then start rolling out within sprints, which could be anywhere from 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. The best number is from 2 to 3 weeks. Nothing below 2 weeks ever work, at least not in my experience. And everything over 3 weeks is just not agile enough, because you spend a whole month into producing something that didn't add value immediately. So it goes against the Agile Manifesto. Once the planning is complete, the implementation starts, and it brings up impediment, which is logged. Then it's presented into a burn down chart, which is a resource for everyone, especially the project manager, who checks what's going on, and the entire team needs to help by adding the hours, the hours or story points, depending on how the team works, into each specific user story, so the burn down chart is updated. After that, we got a daily scrum. This happens every day. It's a 15-minute chat, which will be covered in another session. The sprint is reviewed before it enters into a retrospect, which is another session that we were going to discuss later on. I believe it's in Wednesday. So, as I mentioned, Scrum is the most used of many frameworks of the Agile methodology, which is characterized by cycles or stages of development, which we discussed in the previous slide, known as sprints. Every day there's a small 15-minute call, which is a daily call, that takes the role of synchronizing activities and finding the best way to plan the workday. The advantages of Scrum is that there is a lot of motivation in teams, because programmers need to meet the deadline of every sprint, and they are updated daily. The transparency allows for the project to be followed by all members of a team or even an organization. The focus is on quality, and in Scrum, the methodology results hopefully in fewer mistakes. And the dynamic of this method allows developers to organize and reorganize priorities, ensuring that sprints that have not been yet completed get more attention. The disadvantages is that the segmentation of the project and the search for agility of the development can sometimes lead the team to lose track of the project as a whole, focusing only on one part, the particular sprint. Each developer role may not be well defined, resulting in some confusion among team members. And this thing about roles is, I believe I need another session altogether regarding roles. I end up spending a lot of time whenever I join a company defining and redefining roles, because they're not well known, or some out of bounds activities happen within different roles that should happen, or at least not ideally. Then we have Kanban. Kanban is a very straightforward use of vertical silos that hold specific parts of the development. So you can have stories, then tasks to do, and then the individual states of each one of them, like in progress, testing, and done. I believe we should have something very particular for Kanban if anyone is interested, because it has a lot to dig in, such as work in progress limits. So specific verticals cannot have more than X amount of items, but it also depends on the velocity in which the team delivers the items. But this is just an overview. So Kanban is a Japanese word for just in time. It's a board that is divided into columns or verticals that I showed you before. It shows every flow of the software production. As the development evolves, the information it contains in the table changes, and when a new task comes into play, a new card is created. The advantages are the ability to view all tasks of one project completed, in progress, or in testing, for example. It's possible to limit the number of running tasks, as I mentioned in the previous slide. That is the amount of work, bearing in mind its resolution or the deliverability. Focus on the duration of a cycle, how long it takes a task to go from backlog to the final stage, and allows for continuous deliveries. The difference in Kanban is that sprints are not used. The idea is that everyone pushes everything towards the done vertical. It could happen that the entire team is required to push a specific task, which is usually referred to as swatting. Not like using a swatter to kill a bug, but swatting as the SWAT team from armed forces. So everyone actually pushes that task towards done, and it's a very particular scenario, but it could happen. The disadvantages is that it is possible for members of a team to misinterpret the information shown on the Kanban board, especially when it's revealed as outdated. And since there are no time frames in Kanban, as I mentioned before, you can face time-related problems such as delays associated with each and every stage. As I mentioned, this is not usually or commonly used within sprints. There is a version which is Scrumban, where Scrum meets Kanban, and a Kanban board could be used within a sprint scenario. Yeah, well, I happen to use it. But the thing is, the ceremonies tend to clash with each other. Kanban does not have many ceremonies other than starting the day, looking at the board and picking up a task and pushing it towards done, and that's it. So there is no daily. That's why Scrumban came together. 15-minute call, everyone takes a look at the board, they realize what they're doing, and they discuss what happens to see if there is any outdated item. And that's where they combine and they match together. So low points get implemented within Scrum. And that's that. Now, extreme programming. This is a challenge for me, and particularly because of spikes. I haven't heard of Scrum Extreme. There's no way to put it together, but I have seen spikes put into Scrum, and they're not Scrum items. They're part of extreme programming. Is a completely particular methodology that was created by a person that is going to be mentioned afterwards. It's Ken Beck. Yeah, I forgot his name. So the difference here is that it works in parallel with the architecture team, and many spikes come up. Like if you're building a tent, those spikes intend to be time boxed and contain a specific deliverable. What means is that if you have a backlog, if you have an item that needs to be produced and it's not correctly understood, a spike could be presented by anyone in the team saying, we need to do something before that. There's a prerequisite. Scrum does not manage prerequisites well. Everything in the backlog needs to be pushed. And if it was not correctly split, most of the times it's pushed to another sprint instead of actually being produced within the same sprint. So the spike comes in and tells everyone we need a previous task before we actually engage. And that task is usually contained within a time box. That time box could be anything. I suggest anyone shouldn't use more than, let's say, 8 hours, which is 1 business day, in order to produce something very specific. Let's say we're going to create a manual, something that actually explains how to use something that is needed for this functionality. It happened to me a year ago. We started working with a team using Firebase. The team didn't know how to use Firebase, so a spike was created, and the time box was not limited. The team wanted to size it and plan it, so it was presented into a planning session. I objected. Nobody understood methodology, so it was planned and sized, and the number was an 8, which means that an entire sprint was needed for a spike. That's not the correct use of a spike. The spike needs to be time boxed, it should not be planned or estimated, because it has a time box, right? So if you agree that you're going to use 8 hours, use 8 hours. If you are going to give a deliverable, an item, a document, whatever, just do that. And then get back to the team. And if you need to do a second planning or reviewing a specific item within a refinement session, do that. But do not estimate a spike. It's not the way it's meant to be used. After that, as you can see, the user stories are put into a release planning. Both architectural and other uncertain items are worked with spikes. Then it's pushed into an iteration, and then acceptance testing, and then small releases. This is very, very similar to Scrum, with the particularity that if the team doesn't understand how to do something, spikes are pushed in. So as I mentioned, was developed by Kent Beck. It's a methodology that emphasizes values such as communication, simplicity, feedback, courage, and respect, and prioritizes customer satisfaction over everything else. In extreme programming, software is tested from day one, collecting feedback to improve development, and that's the very interesting use of spikes for specific activities that need to be put outside of the release planning. The advantages are that the simplicity of the written code works as an advantage, since it allows for its improvement at any given time. The whole process and the whole cycle of extreme programming development is visible, therefore creating goals for developers and showing results in a relatively fast way. Software development turns out to be more agile than in other methodologies, precisely because of the constant testing. And extreme programming also contributes to uplifting the talent of the teams and to their withholding, as long as it's implemented correctly, as I mentioned. As a disadvantage, the extreme focus on code can lead to less importance being paid to design, hence requiring extra attention to that matter. This usually ends up in team fragmentation, where the design team is part of a different cell altogether. So when the coding ends, it's pushed to the design team, and the design team needs to do the final touches, such as UX, UI. I've seen that happening also. This framework may not work in the best way possible if all team members are not working in the same geographical area. This is also because of the spike method that needs to happen within a time box. And if the team is not well put under the same roof, those spikes could cause multiple meetings, and those meetings eat up time. So the time box is stretched and the spike does not achieve its original objective. In extreme programming projects, a registry of possible errors is not always maintained, and the lack of monitoring can lead to similar bugs in the future. This is also known as scope creep, which means that the scope is not correctly defined and ends up being somewhat of a cancerous being altogether, which needs to be cut down and split it again because of this. And there is also more. SAFe, which is Scaled Agile Framework. It's very commonly used now by big corporations such as Deloitte. I work with them, and it's very, very important. However, it contains multiple other roles, such as the trained release engineer. It's very in deep, and I need to create a specific presentation for that if anyone is interested. Lean Agile could also be found within SAFe, within SAFe. And these links will be passed on to you when I finish the 3 sessions. I'll publish all of this within LinkedIn. Crystal clear Agile. This is something that I found within my research. I couldn't actually put it into the presentation because I didn't use it myself, and I wanted to talk about something that I didn't experience myself. But maybe if someone is interested, maybe we can dig into it. So what's next is the backlog types and its inhabitants. Most of the times we talk about the product backlog, but that's not the only one. There are, as I mentioned before, incidents backlogs. There is the sprint backlog, which is the currently worked on backlog, and its inhabitants, which we mostly speak about user stories, but that's not the only case. There's a bunch more things like epics, features, tasks, test plan, the test cases themselves. So the idea is that we go into the backlog and define what is this beast about. So the idea of this specific presentation was just to mention those 3 methodologies, and then we can dig in deeper into the rest of the ecosystem. I thank you for your time, and I hope to see you on my next session. Thank you.